Welcome everybody to this online lecture from the Institute of Advanced Architecture. My name is Daniel Ibanez. I am a Doctor of Design and Director of IAC, of the Institute for Advanced Architecture. It is my pleasure to invite you to this first inaugural online lecture as part of a series of lectures that we are doing around the 10th edition of the Advanced Architectural Contest. The Advanced Architectural Contest is a competition launched by IAC that we do every 2 years, trying to pose an important question for architecture, an important question for design, for the built environment, for urbanization, basically looking for responses from the design community, from students, from young practitioners, or even more experienced practitioners on innovative and very experimental responses. This year, as some of you might know, we decided to launch a competition that is called the Artificial Intelligence for the Built Environment, where we are really, putting some important, I think, questions that are very trendy today around, the role of AI, how AI is going to affect design, how it's going to affect the built environment. So we thought this was a good excuse, a good opportunity to have brilliant minds and talent from all around the world to try to, bring ideas and to address important questions. As some of you might have seen in the website of the competition that we will share in the chat, we have several categories with important topics, and we are very much looking forward to responses that address those. So as part of this competition, we thought it was important to bring into conversation, to talk with us, people that we consider experts in the field, people that are leading in some way these conversations globally. And again, it's my very, very own pleasure to present to all of you Patricia Velasquez, or Pico Velasquez, as most of us call her. Patricia is a computational architect and multiverse thought leader. Patricia is founder as well and CEO of a company that's called Vera, that she will explain to us in her talk. And she, throughout her practice, she seeks to drive the bridging of our physical and virtual worlds through architecture, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and many other means and methods that she will be addressing today. Patricia is also, a very like a polymath. She has a background in architecture and mathematics. She has been engaging very much with questions of computational design, and I was very, very fortunate to meet her while we were both studying at Harvard university, and I have followed her career over the last years, where she has been winning awards, doing really cutting edge projects, working for very important companies, including Google, working in iconic places such as the Hard Rock Casino and hotels in Las Vegas and many other places. So it's a treat for us, Patricia, that you have agreed to join us. We are very much looking forward to, in a way, listen to you, listen in your path, and especially helping us to illuminate this fantastic wall of the artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and how, as you were saying, bridging these two worlds of both of the physical and the digital. So please, all of you, join me in welcoming Patricia Velasquez to IAC, even though this is a virtual conference. And Patricia, the floor is yours. Thank you again, and very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me, and a pleasure to meet everyone here. As Daniel explained a little bit before, my transition went from traditional architecture, studying in Colombia, that's where I am actually right now, in Universidad de los Andes, with a background in architecture and math, but also with dance. I was a dancer for almost 20 years throughout my career. So I've had like inspiration from a lot of different perspectives to end up building the designs for the worlds that I'm creating today with my firm and with a lot of collaborators and partners along the path. What I'm showing here right now is actually one of my designs. It's design based on some mathematical equations, which are sinusoidal equations, which is simple harmonic motion. And this is here just like an illustration of design practices and how we can use different methods to create objects. Most of this talk is going to be mostly focused on architecture, architecture from buildings, experiences or brand experiences into the future of cities. But I just wanted to start off and kind of like gauge into like the scalability of the work that we do and how you can design from a product to a city, and it's always within the same aspects or with the same mentality that you can do so. So the first project that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through 6 projects and then a presentation that's more generalized around the metaverse, AI, or just like emerging tech and architecture and how it's going to affect our fields and the cool stuff that we can do with it. So the first project I'm going to talk about is Google headquarters. This is a project that I worked while at the Archangels Group in New York City. I was the director of the canopy geometry, coming out of Harvard University with the computational design program. My expertise was a combination of what would be complex geometry, energy efficiency, and different fabrication processes or discretization processes for complex structures. So what we did here was, how do we build an entire building, in this case for Google, which was for 7,000 employees, that could be a single canopy that would house the entire environment, right? That was going to be a combination of enclosed spaces with open spaces, but mostly it was about having this whole community under the same roof. So the roof had to have openings, of course, but still shaded areas, because especially for energy efficiency and everything that has to do with daylighting factors and I guess like just like the comfort of being in a workspace. It became like this play between these surfaces that felt like they were suspended like a canopy, like a circus canopy in a way, but that still had like enough openings so that it could have daylighting throughout the day in the most efficient way possible. So as you can see here on the top, this is kind of like a breakdown of the canopy, and the bottom as well. These are, I'm going to zoom into them, but we have like the floor plan, which is like this grid that has like different levels. And then the ceiling, which is the canopy that I'm speaking of, that is divided into 3 different levels that I'll speak like more generalized, because of course I want to go through like a whole transition of architecture projects. But I think here more specifically is where I started the whole vision of how data-driven design is the most important part of the future of design, because we're no longer manually designing things. The decisions that we make have external and internal inputs. External meaning environmental, things that have to do outside the building. Internal meaning for the function of the people that are going to be inhabiting it. So in this case specifically, the top of roof, which is like what we see here, is all covered with PV panels. There was a big effort, like a very prominent effort, into making this whole building as sustainable as possible, reaching closest to net zero energy, including using the grid and being able to give back the energy that the project conceives to the city. So it was very important for it to be addressable in the sense that the canopy was consistently having the best angles as possible for the energy consumption. But at the same time, we have a very complex canopy with double curvature, which means that the water is going to try to stagnate. So eventually we have to also be thinking about how the top of roof is managing water and how we're passing it through different columns in different parts of the system. You can see this here is during fabrication. Between each of the panels of the canopy is the columns. The center column is almost 40 feet high. Each panel is 100 times 100 feet high, so that you can get kind of like a proportion of it. 40 feet in meters is, I think, how much is 40 feet in meters? But I think it's over like,
it's like 13 something, 13, 14. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. And then you can see here the curvature on the bottom that's going to affect where the water ends up going into the columns. But at the same time, it's also going to affect the acoustics in the inside, how the sound is going to reflect inside of a big space like this, and with so many people speaking simultaneously. And at the same time, the opening and the intersection between them is going to have an effect on the structure integrity, which in this case was functioning under tension, and then the daylighting factor, which how much daylight actually enters the space. You'll see here some of the models for this, which was all built between C# and Grasshopper. And it was a very beautiful collaboration, let's say, between us architects, the structural engineers, the acoustic engineers, and the environmental engineers that were part of this project. You see here kind of the scale. So some of the most important things I would say in terms of data-driven design that we had for this project was the fact that during these analyses, even if the project ends up being static, and when I refer to static is because I'm going to show you some projects that are more dynamic, whether it's with digital content and other aspects of it. But in this case, like the final design is the final design and it's going to be a static building. But getting to that final static design took a lot of effort into understanding all the different components that were going to be involved, and therefore all the data that was being transferred. I have a couple more images and then I'll pass on to the next project. All of this you can find on Big's website or my website as well, or Arab's website. A lot of different collaborators. Heatherwick as well was part of the project. There's two Google headquarters, one which is Bayview, the other one is Mountain View, which they kind of like shared responsibilities in that case. The next project that I'm going to speak of is the Hard Rock Oculus, Hard Rock Casino and Hotel. We have worked on some stuff in Vegas. This one particularly is in Florida. And what I really love about this project is that it starts combining the physical and the virtual, in the sense that the space is a physical building. This is the entrance of the casino. It is the place that aggregates and kind of like brings together and also kind of like shows the path to what is the hotel, the theater, the casino, and the shopping. So it is kind of like the nucleus of what this project is. So instead of doing like a traditional lobby that is just like a large lobby, we're like, how do we create a performance? But in some way, a passive performance, in the sense that it's not going to influence too much the people that are passing, but it is going to, in a way, like set the scene and the mood of the space. So in this particular design, and I'll show. Let's see how the video is playing, because apologies that my Wi-Fi isn't the best when we're doing Zoom. So I hope it's not too choppy. But you'll see here that we have a combination of LED walls, projection walls, different lighting that is put on strips throughout the whole canopy of this section, as well as the green walls that are on the outside. There's a water fountain that's controllable as well. The water fountain has over 400 pistons. This was designed by WET, the company that did the waterfall for the Singapore airport and for the Las Vegas Bellagio, and for Dubai as well. And Focus Design were the ones that did the lighting. I was the director of the project. Rockwell Group was the main architect. And the whole concept here is of bridging all these different aspects of performance, or I would say more of performance than of experience, and how we could turn this into something that became an extension of the brand of the Hard Rock, which was around music. So we worked with 8 music artists for the opening, which included Muse, David Bowie, Pitbull, Maroon 5, Sting. There was a couple more, I'm just trying to remember. Bill Withers was another one. But for each of them, what we created was like this palette of colors, palette of movements, anything that had to do with the expression of how do you turn a song into an entire experience. And you can see here the waterfall, for example, that it has different patterns. The outside is a binary pattern, binary code, which means that it could have like a pixelated pattern that moves through time as it goes down. And then that's the outside. And then the inside, it's based on pressure. So it creates like these beautiful like sinusoidal moments, as you can see there, like some expansions and contractions of the water. I'm going to show a couple more images here, but then I'm going to jump up to the next one. And you can see there like the power of the lighting. I'm just going to show this one a little bit more, just so you can see the waterfall. and the patterns that the waterfall creates. I like to think in a way that the building is dancing because it's not very often that you see so many different ways that you can create like dynamics or expression inside of an architectural space. So yeah, this was a very fun project to work on. This song specifically is one of Muse. So it goes like deep into space and it's like very dramatic with the lighting and everything that's happening, which is pretty cool. You can see on the outside as well that there's like this like titillation, I don't know what the exact word is, of the lighting outside. Well, here's some fabrication photos. Skip that one because we're short on time. The next project I'm going to speak about is Social Galaxy. This is a project that was done in collaboration with Kenzo Digital. Kenzo Digital also did air for One Vanderbilt. If you guys haven't been in New York City to the rooftop of the highest building that has like infinity mirrors, it's a wonderful experience. This one in particular was for Samsung. Samsung, like the device company, for which case we created an installation that used all the Samsung devices in an immersive way. Which is also interactive, and we'll talk about the interactivity in a second. But the whole experience here is that it's an infinite space, even if it's physically very small, it's like the size of a room. But because it has mirrors on the floor and on the ceiling and on the side, basically it's just like half a cylinder that's converted into like this, almost like a, yeah, like a black hole of content. The content particularly is the Instagram content of every user that comes inside. So as you come in, you have a very unique experience in the sense that you log into your Instagram and you end up seeing an infinite projection of your digital self. Here, this project was maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. All the projects that I'm showing are from 2015 until now. So it's been like the last 8 years of my career, like post-Harvard. So this project in particular was at the time that social media was pretty prevalent. Like I think right now it's pretty common for everyone to have a digital identity. We don't even question it anymore. It's as, you know, as important as it is to have a physical one, like whether it's LinkedIn or, you know, professional or non-professional one. We do have half of our lives, including our talks right now, through digital mediums. So here, being kind of like the boom of Instagram, what we wanted to was put people in the middle of this, of like, how are you presenting yourself to the world? Like, what is this digital identity, and what does it mean for us to be in this space that is like the combination of both? I'll show a little bit more images. All of these are photos. The project has toured in different locations, including Korea, Japan, Brazil, Germany, and New York City was the first one. So you'll see different formats throughout the photos. But essentially, some are vertical, some are horizontal, but essentially this is the feel of it. You can see here the floor plan being very small, but still having like a very dramatic effect. This was a vertical one. It gives it more like a tubular effect. But yeah, all of these are photos, which I think is like pretty cool to think that we can create spaces that feel virtual, but in the physical reality. I'm gonna jump into one of my more recent projects. This is something that is still like in concept stage, but has passed the stage that we can also share, which is exciting. And just to explain a little bit as well as like how my career has transitioned, there's been some things that I wouldn't say planned, but let's say that I do follow like my intuition and my gut as to the things that I'm attracted to the most. So architecture and complex geometry is one of them. So you'll see that throughout most of my projects. Digital media, whether it's like with music or with lighting or with digital projections, with digital content, that has been something that through film and different experiences have also attracted me, maybe because of dance and just like the theater experience, always having all these different ways of expression coming together into one. So digital media has been a big one. But then I never thought that I was going to end up like doing video games. But during COVID, most of my projects, physical projects, got paused for almost 1.5 years, to the extent that I had to pivot the company. And this company initially was Pico. I'll talk a little bit further about Vera, my new company, which is a technology company. But in this case, in particular, the transition meant that I needed to go into a space that was more viable, which became video games. And I became the director of the video game called Super Forest, which I guess I can talk about this one first, and then we'll go into the Gaga world. But this is the first time that, more so than designing a physical space, I was designing a virtual environment, a virtual world that had characters, that had rules, that had challenges, that had all these different types of interactions that we usually don't have to deal with in the physical space. But that created like all these different levels and intricacies in narrative that were interesting as well. And I thought it was like very interesting, of course, from the perspective of creating like virtual environments. This one in particular, called Super Forest, it's a world building game. So imagine like a Sim City, but instead of building cities, you're building natural environments like forests. You have all these different levels of life, let's say, from trees to animals. The animals go from like the smaller animals to eventually like spirit animals that become like the guides of the forest. And the coolest thing about the project is that every tree that was being planted in here, we were also planting in real life. It was a collaboration with different NGO partnerships around the world. And this kind of got me ticking as to like, wow, if everyone that was playing games could also be having some sort of impact in real life, like what could we actually do for the world? There's over 3 billion players, whether it's like from Candy Crush to like Riot Games, like it doesn't matter like how complex it is, like we are very attached to gamification, having like these virtual environments like in-house through applications or through smartphones or our computers. So it became like very, very important for me to think like how we could potentially create like not only these beautiful environments to escape into or to learn from, but to do something that could also have impact in the physical world. This project as well had a lot of like computational elements, which I'm gonna like briefly talk to, but I think it's very interesting when you're inside of virtual worlds, how it works. But you don't want to create every item from scratch. Like you create characters, you create trees, but you're creating mostly systems of like how things behave, behavioral in terms of like how they behave visually, but also how they behave in terms of interactions. So we're not going to have like the same tree in every place, right? But we create a design or a way that a tree looks like, or the way that it grows. And then depending on the environment, we have randomized factors that make them all look unique, so that it looks like more like an organic forest. And the same happens with animals. We had all these like mystical animals show up, but instead of like having to design like a million mystical animals, like it would be a combination of what the trees that were being planted would be garnishing like different animals for different species. And then the patterns and the colors were also something that was generically or like procedurally defined. So that was my video game experience, which I have since then have not gone into like full video games. But what started happening was that during COVID, the whole movement of metaverse, especially going from Fortnite and virtual concerts, became very prevalent, let's say. And there was a lot of interest into like, wow, we have virtual concerts that are attracting 20 million, 50 million, 100 million people. Like, what does this mean? Like in terms of capacity, like normal theaters go from like 20,000 to maybe 80,000 if it's a huge stadium, right? So the proportions of this are absolutely abdominal, which means that you go from having maybe high ticketed price, lower entry, to lower ticketed price, higher entry, going from like passive experiences that you're seeing, but with a community, to like a non-community individual experiences that are more active. So there's a lot of like different translations here that are very interesting. And with that, we partnered with MGM Casino. You guys are not hearing the audio, so I'm not going to put it, to create a concert for Lady Gaga that's both physical and virtual. In this case, in particular, the whole idea is that we're building a Gaga world. It's not just about creating a virtual concert that is like mimicking the physical one. It's about having a physical experience that you can have a like very unique interaction that has augmented reality as well. And I'll show some of the images as that too. But at the same time, there's an entire world, you know, literally an entire world that the fans of Lady Gaga, because she has like more than 40 million, like almost 50 million, can participate in exploring, can participate in building, can participate in creating and selling, create like an entire world that is sustainable. So it's going from this concept of concert separated from like a website, and then maybe merchandise and whatever it is, like the other companies and endorsements that she has through her brands, to bringing it on to like an entire ecosystem, which we call the artist ecosystem, in which everyone can participate. So yeah, so this is the stage design, Chromatica album. So it's like sci-fi kind of like goth meets Matrix. But it's like this whole concept of like you have the sphere, but inside of the sphere is Gaga. The sphere has projection mapping with her face, but then once it's removed, it removes her identity. So you have like all these different layers. The background of the stage is a 180-degree LED screen. She'll see a little bit more in the moment, but it becomes like this space that the physical is full multimedia, but then the virtual is able to interact with the physical as well through the screen and through the different like AR options. It was a time that where digital assets and NFTs were a thing, which I think they will come back just with different name and with hopefully more value or perceived value. But this whole idea about, virtual experiences, the artist ecosystem, as I mentioned, and creating this concept of like digital assets, both for creation and for transfer. So we build out an entire city, like the design of the city, the design of the avatar, from like more generic to like more realistic, as like how is it going to be portrayed, whether it's like through sensors and different ways in which the interactivity and the actions in the physical space could translate to the virtual and back. And then thinking that because it's a world, how do we mix all these behind the scenes and all these different things that the Gaga world encompasses? Because right now, through artists and through brands, we only get to see a small part of it. We don't get to see all of it. One of my favorite parts was she has a foundation. It's called the Born This Way Foundation, which is for mental health. And I thought it would be very beautiful for there to be a moment in the concert where, including in the virtual world, you would have this button that says Born This Way Foundation with a heart. And when you click on it, you're donating $1 to the foundation, and then your name with a heart and your name and your country come out. And this would also be projected on the screen of the physical concert. So there would be a moment in which she sees all of her fans contributing to one of the things that she cares the most, which is her foundation, which I think would be very touching. So with that said, I'm going to go into a presentation. The beginning takes like a second to load because it's like a heavy clip. But here I'm going to speak more generalized on the topics of different technologies and how they're evolving and their impact on architecture. So the future of our built environment. So as I mentioned, data-driven design is kind of like the perspective that I take, but whether it's like data-driven or not data-driven, I think it's mostly to think about like how can we use technology to enhance the spaces and the experiences that we have, that we're creating. I like to start this by defining architect. I think too much architects think that we design buildings and that's it, or cities, etc., or something like very specific. But architecture is just to build, and that building, like that unleashing of creativity, of innovation, of being a visionary, I think can go throughout multiple mediums and has to evolve as technology evolves with it. So in a way, at least through my career, I've seen that the architect, or like being the architect, has gone from designing spaces, buildings, experiences, cities, into systems, and then now more into processes as we move into AI. And more importantly, I think right now it's also like the integration of all of these, like understanding that both the space, the system, and the processes are just as important. The space is the one that gives us, the space and the experience. The system is the way that we communicate. It's the way that we transact in terms of our economy. It's the way that the internet moves data. So basically, systems are the underlying architecture of the non-visible world. And then the processes is just understanding that everything in the system and the space has a process. And the more we optimize these processes, or the more we understand and we can analyze the processes, the better it's going to be for the efficiency of the design, whether that efficiency be for the movement of a person inside of a space, or the traffic of a city, or even larger, of like literally how we're processing data. So there's a lot of emerging technologies that, we call them emerging, but they've been around for a long time, but depends on how long you've been in the space. Like we've been talking about like brain-computer interface and blockchain and spatial computing, like for more than maybe 20 years. But I think most importantly is that they're becoming accessible to the public now. They're becoming productized, and larger companies are coming in to play bigger roles in how they turn them into assets, services, products, etc., that can be used for the general public. So it's no longer R&D. It's no longer like in the back of the basement, people playing with their VR. These are things that are happening right now, which are going to start influencing how we design spaces, how we design cities, and eventually like how we end up designing like the human planet interface, let's say. So here, just to like generalize, I'm talking about like spatial computing and AR, VR kind of like fall within the same thing. Edge computing is kind of like a way to sustain it. 5G also a way to sustain it. Blockchain is like how we're connecting this data, how we're storing this data, going from centralized to decentralized, which I'll speak a little bit more of. Sensors is kind of like how we connect to that data. I like to think in a way that our senses are already data. So the way that we're using sensors to be able to translate the physical data to the virtual data is going to be very interesting, because it doesn't necessarily have to be linear. In a lot of ways, we can switch those things up. Like what I hear can become something visual, or the other way around, or kind of synesthetic, that I can put out emotion, like a gesture, and that gesture can turn into music, can turn into space, can turn into sound, it can turn into color, it can be expressed in a lot of different ways. And then just like at the top, because I think it's like the most craziest one, but it's going to be one of the most interesting, is literally brain-computer interface, and thinking that we no longer have to click on things. We no longer have to go through the process that we do now of thinking, turning into language, that language turning into a device that can understand the language, and then that, whether it's a computer or it's a voice note, and then that having to transfer to the other user. But instead it's going directly from your brain waves being interpreted as data, and that data being interpreted as the output. And just to generalize here, but I think in terms of like how we're designing spaces and how all of these different technologies come into play here, is that we're going from physical or only physical into virtual, or like physical virtual combination. Because it doesn't mean that one is going to overcome the other or take over the other. It's more like it's an extension that becomes an integration. But from physical to virtual, and the integration of those, from static to dynamic, and the integration of those, and dynamic being from like actual physical dynamics, which has to do with robotics, different like kinesthetics, etc. Or it can be dynamic in terms of like the digital content and interactions, like I mentioned in some of our projects. From passive to interactive, I think too much we've been so used to passive content that we don't even realize that even watching Netflix and social media is passive. We are not interacting with it. Versus when we go into video games, and that's what I thought was very interesting going into these worlds, is that things actually change. The result of what you watch changes, or the story changes based on your interaction and based on your behavior, which I think is super interesting. And then, of course, add AI into that, and to think that it's not only like a fixed interaction, but the interaction is adaptive, and it's adaptive to you specifically, whether that's based on your demographics, or it's based on location, or it's based on the product that is being driven, or it's based on, it could be based on so many different things. But essentially is thinking that if I enter into a space, whether that be a room for me, or to meditate, or whether that be the new virtual school that I'm going to, or whether that be the concert, or whether that be a game, the space that is for me is going to be different than it is for Daniel, or is going to be for all of you. It's going to be adapted in a way that is more tailored to my needs, to my desires, and to whatever it is that the product is being sold. And then 2D, 3D, which we used to think that that's where we would stay. 3D, like maybe 4D with sound. But I think especially as I was saying, with senses as data and the sense of synesthesia, and even creating more senses, we can create with data more types of senses, digital senses. Like, could we even create like I guess like a digital language? So going from like 2D to 3D to 3D, and what we're calling XD, which means that there is no limit in the amount of dimensions that we can create, because of the amount of content or the amount of data that can be portrayed for each point that we understand or that we comprehend. So in terms of industries, I also like to explain that metaverse and AI, I know people don't like the word metaverse right now because it's kind of been like hijacked by Meta and going into like the wrong perception, but metaverse just being like the sense of virtual experiences that are connected with the physical experiences. And then AI, I think AI is going to be a big part of metaverse, and I'll do a diagram later, but that shows kind of how everything is part of the metaverse. but I think it's important to understand that this goes cross-industry. This isn't just specifically for for architecture, design, entertainment, but this is agriculture, this is education, this is literally changing the way that we behave and that we communicate with others, and therefore form communities and economies. This is my diagram of the metaverse layers, in case some people kind of get confused. But we have, I believe, the metaverse that contains everything being centralized and decentralized. Inside of it, we have the internet, which tends to be 2D with part of the 3D part of it. The intersection between the physical and the whole virtual space is what we call the augmented or the extended. And then the intersection of the physical and the augmented, not in terms of the internet, but more in terms of all other types of assets, is what we call phygital. So that is a concept that was also moving a lot during blockchain, which is that if you buy a pair of shoes or a pair of art, could I have the phygital version, meaning that it is tracked on the blockchain, it has a virtual identity that's a digital twin to it, but there's also like a physical part to it, not just only physical. So that's in terms of metaverse. In terms of blockchain, just because I'm going to go through like very basically some of the different technologies here, blockchain, what I think is like most powerful, or what the world thinks is the most powerful, is going from centralized to decentralized and potentially distributed. And this is changing a lot. Data ownership, like how we store our data. I don't think people like realize as much that our data is owned by all these different companies and it's not our own, right? So it's like, what does it mean to own our own data? I think that's going to change a lot of different things in the future, like from security, governance, and of course like economy. That falls into transactions, and of course, like I mentioned, governance, which is through DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that came through blockchain as well. Daniel, I realized that I took a little bit longer, so is it okay if I just like run through the presentation, even if we run short on questions, or if everyone's okay to stay a little bit longer for questions, like I have extra time afterwards too.
Absolutely fine by me, but maybe Alice or Erica should help out here. But I think it's fine. If it's 5-10 minutes more, it should be okay. Pico, no problem.
There's absolutely no problem.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So like, should I like binge through this, or yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it at a decent pace. So so when we talk about AI as well, I think a lot of people, I mean, depending on where you stand, like the first entrance to AI has been OpenAI with ChatGPT, right? It's the first product that becomes, I guess, like massified to this extent. I read recently that in this past year, it's done over $1 billion in revenue with new ChatGPT 4. It launched in December, so it's almost going to be a year now. No product has scaled this quick, which kind of shows the demand, the market, the desire for people to have an external intelligence to aid or to help out in some of the process that we do before. In a way, I like to compare this to the same way as industrialization and different machines took over the work or the handwork of different people, whether it was like in fabrics or agriculture, the idea of like not having to do the physical labor and having a machine do it. It was able to scale a lot of the products that we have right now. And in the same way, like right now, the machinery has become the computers. We spend so much time on our computers and doing tasks that are repetitive and don't necessarily have like enough creativity or output that needs to be done one by one, but that just has like slight iterations that AI could easily take care of. So this goes through all the different fragments of content, which I could list more, but these are the most basic ones, which is like communication or text, chat, image and video, which are kind of coming out of the same, like, and I'll talk a little bit more further about this, but like diffusion mapping is being used for both, which is very interesting. 3D, which you would think that would come more out of image and video, but it's kind of coming out of some different processes. But it's also very interesting to think that the more we go into more gamified, like, for those that don't know, like, games, even if they're centralized, Fortnite and Roblox, they have each like over 250 million people inside, so that's like over the US inside of them. Of course, it doesn't compare to like social media that goes in the billions, like in the maybe half the population are on social media, but it's still like very close and still moving very quickly. So there is this desire of having things in 3-dimensional environments instead of just like 2-dimensional content. Audio, because everything is linked with audio, at least that's how we express ourselves as humans. And then code, which is kind of like the back end of how things are built in the world right now. All of this is being streamlined, optimized, and different processes are being used, whether it's neural networks or machine learning, deep learning, large language models, and generative, which is mostly for design, as you'll see. So what I think is like super cool about this, and I think the world can agree, is that I think there's a lot of fear. No doubt there's a lot of fear as to like replacement of jobs and what is this going to mean for, from data security and like being like the plagiarism of digital identities, and like, is there going to be another Pico out there that's my digital self that's now going to be sold, and no longer I don't need to give things personally, like who's going to own that license? Or is my role as an architect no longer going to be valid, because like if I can create an image in 2 seconds or a building in 3 seconds, then what do I need my brain for? What do I need the architecture for? So there's a lot of concerns, of course, but I think the more we focus less on the process and more on the output, we realize that it doesn't really matter like how you farm the grains, like whether it's someone picking them up manually or it's a machine. What matters is that we get the grains out and we're able to deliver them to the place that it needs. And the same thing with architecture, like let's not get caught up in the process. Let's remember that what's important is the outcome, which is the building of that experience or building of that city and how it's going to end up affecting humanity or the planet or the specific society, etc. So it's like all of this is what it's helping, is just optimize those processes. And making that the processes are every time more adapted to us, right? That the way that I design architecture is going to be different from Daniel's, it's going to be different from everyone here in the room, and same goes from like filmmaking to music production, etc. And it's like, how can we use technology to further aid our creation or aid the processes that we have for creation? One of the things that I like the most, and this is the reason why, like every time like I get a new technology comes out, like I kind of change my outlines, like metaverse and AI, metaverse and blockchain, because it's not really about just like talking about a specific technology. It's more how we're using these technologies as an opportunity to rethink the spaces or rebuild the spaces that we have created before. And whether that's a theater and thinking about, how a theater is meant to change. And you saw the MSG Sphere that launched recently, it's changing a lot of like what entertainment or like music entertainment is going to have for the future. But education, I'm going to show a couple of examples here. So many things are on the brink of like really needing a disruption. I think new technologies just kind of become the gateway for that opportunity. So I'm going to go through 3 examples here. The first one is a virtual physical concert, very similar to, like I mentioned, with the Lady Gaga project, but just to give proportions. When Billie Eilish gave a virtual concert during COVID, 70 million of her fans attended. This is more than 90% of her total followers. Normally, 1 to 2 million of people attend. So there's something like really powerful about her being able to reach, or her audience being able to reach her more than they usually would before. Of course, as well, virtual performances or this like combination of virtual performances give for more creativity. And then the fact that you have virtual spaces allows for content creation to be done by the fans as well. So it's not just about, this passive receiving of information, but it's also like this collaborative creation of things that, build on this brand and build on the community that these brands represent. When we talk about education, I like to highlight that I think most people don't realize that there's so many children in the world. 1.9 billion children are, kids below 15 years old, which is 20% don't have access to formal education. But I would say that, if you talk about like formal, nor formal, or just like the access to the internet, it's definitely a lot higher. And most children don't even have great education anyways. So the reason for this is because education is expensive, or good education is expensive. But if we talk about digital content and digital experiences, you can bring this to such a large audience with lower budgets, because you're creating one single product that can be streamlined. And then if you're using generative process or AI, then you're making them every time more specific to the output user, to, in this case, to the child that is learning. So not only he's having like immersive experiences of like, instead of us, like at least Daniel and I grew up with books. Some people grew up with tablets, which is a little bit more interactive. But now imagine growing up like thinking about outer space or the autonomy of a body, etc., and being able to interact with it and see it in 3D, etc. But now think that whole product, whatever it costs to build it for one person, is going to cost to build it for the 1.9 people or the 7 billion people that want to have access to it. So it's just very powerful to realize like how we can have from like increased audience reach to personalized tutoring and content for better education. And then the last example that I like to give back to the impact that game Super Forest gave on me was just like coming back to terms as to like what is the impact that we have in the world and how much are we actually doing for it. So this data is probably from the beginning of the year, so I don't know if it's fully accurate, but along the lines of 43 billion tons of carbon emissions per year. To actually be able to offset this, we would need to plant 22 billion trees. Of course, the offsetting doesn't need to be only with trees, but this is just like an example to give people a proportion. And right now there's more than 3 billion players. So we're kind of saying that, 10 trees per person a year, and you're reaching the entirety of, the offset of the carbon footprint that the world has at this time. Another topic that I think is very pressing is not only thinking about like the impact in terms of sustainability, in terms of reach, but I think kind of is all combined is the impact of technology for inclusivity. Like I mentioned, the metaverse virtual experiences allow to reach the world regardless of the location, just like this expansive global reach. Blockchain, fractional ownership, and DAOs. I think fractional ownership is a very prominent thing that is going to be very important as people participate in different projects. We actually have a project right now in Mexico, which we have 300 acres of land, which we're not going to be developing in a traditional way. Instead, we're doing it through fractionalized ownership, which means that the community gets to own part of the land and make the decisions through a DAO of what's going to get built on there. So it's kind of changing the way of governance and the way that we do traditional development as well. And then AI, of course, there's like a lot of different ways in which it can be inclusive, but I think the best thing is thinking that it's creating tools, that is going to allow people to create content, whether that content be audio or 3D or whatever it is, but it's bringing content to the masses. Right now, most of the people are consumers, not creators. We're on the creator side because we're architects, so we get used to being creators, but most people are just consumers. So there's something very powerful of being able to democratize that and making everyone be a possibility for a creator. So from an architecture perspective, I mean, I'm a big follower of like, social media, like AI generated design. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. So definitely from the design perspective, I think there's going to be a lot of increase in creativity and in productivity. But I think another thing to think about is to realize that like I said, like not everything has to be static. And then there's this sense of like adaptability that can happen inside of virtual spaces that is going to be very fun to explore. And it's not only buildings, but it's also about our identities. When we go more into virtual worlds, we're not only designing spaces, we're also designing ourselves. And then all of this kind of combines into like, what does it mean to build the future of cities? And yeah, I'm almost done. This is just the concluding part, which is the future of cities and how technology and sustainability can come together for that. So when we think about the future of cities, I'm going to name a couple of things and how these emerging technologies going from metaverse, blockchain, and AI are going to help in the development of that. So the first thing to think about, urban planning or, smart infrastructure, thinking like this large scale. Data and sensors is going to be pretty important, which is like this combination of like the physical data and the virtual data. Immersive visualization of like how we conceptualize spaces, and then the optimization of all of these combined. Digital twins, this is something that we're doing for a lot of projects as well, especially when it comes to the city scale. You don't want to wait until you actually build it to see how it's going to behave. So there's a lot of predictive analysis, data-driven decisions. And then I think most importantly is the data accuracy and security that can come from blockchain. A lot of the data right now is being handled on different data sets on different models or different places, which means that all of this is kind of centralized. They're not being combined. We go from projects that are looking at a lot of different layers of data from infrastructure, mobility, supply chain, energy efficiency, and they're all parallel models that don't speak to each other. I think there's something very important about thinking digital twins as a simulation that has everything into one single place, so we can actually start moving things around and see how it behaves on a larger scale. Property sales and management, I don't know if this is the right title for it, but basically to say there's things that are going to be owned, right? And the things that are going to be owned, how are we accessing them? How is the community accessing them? So blockchain transactions do make a lot of things easier. You don't have to go through the process that people go right now buying a property. Everything is just like it's very slow and it's very difficult to go through. So yeah, transactions on the blockchain for a lot of reasons, I think are going to be great for the future, if not for right now, once people realize that blockchain is not as bad as the people that have abused it have posed it to be. Property valuation. So all of this, I think AI is going to be great at anything that has to do, whether it's property or asset valuations and how these things fluctuate, being able to adapt it to consistently to both country scale, community scale, a personal scale, and then predictive maintenance, just knowing that, not everything lasts forever. We need to be able to manage it in the best way possible. Energy efficiency and sustainability. Energy consumption, honestly, is like one of the biggest challenges that the buildings have with sustainability, just because we think that just, the more you create, the more you can consume, and it shouldn't be that way. I think there's a lot of smart ways to be able to evaluate the, smart buildings or sustainable buildings. And right now, the way that it's being done is kind of hectic. Like you do a model and then you get a result, but you don't have it like consistently feeding back into a smarter model that is taking into account the current uses and the current behaviors that could adapt to it. Having a decentralized grid. Right now, the grids are also centralized, which means that even the way that the energy grid across different cities and countries are being managed by centralized systems, which is kind of troubling. It has a lot of corruption in the process as well, lack of transparency. So I think blockchain, in a way, is playing a big role, both from decentralization and from transparent tracking of the data and from the energy. And then the last one is citizens and governance. And whether it's like autonomous organizations, whether this be decentralized or not, I think there's a new future for how, countries and cities are going to be governed, and it might not be as hierarchical as it is right now. I think there's also a lot of importance into like the data that we have as citizens, as users, and, how governments are actually using this, whether it's for control and surveillance or it's for something more positive like security, but being able to have like these different ways of like managing integrity for data. And I think most importantly, just like to conclude into all of these, every time that we have like the opportunity to have like more emerging technologies, like it is important to think about how it's going to be accessible to everyone, not only to the people that have whether it's like the financial, the location prevalence to have access to it, but how do we make it accessible to everyone, equitable, and of course scalable to the world. And then this balance, this is kind of like the conclusion to it, but basically consistently have like this balance between innovation and ethics. And this is something that as we go with AI, this has become one of the most important topics today, which is that what's the balance between both, and are we going to reach a point that technology serves us, or that we serve technology, and how is it being used, and therefore how do we make sure that humans and the planet are consistently at the core. So thank you everyone for being here, and just to conclude, I like to say we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. So be very conscious and excited and kind of empowered as well that you play a role in the world we live in, and what role would you like to play? Thank you.
Bravo, Pico. It was beautiful. Congratulations on both the diversity of the projects you are engaging with, even though, as you tell us, it has a kind of driving path that somehow ties them all together. But also congratulations, because they seem to be super fun and super exciting, from the Google canopy all the way to the, one of these beautiful installations in one of these, big hotels. I think it's really fantastic, and really speaks about, some of your earlier concerns about, how to start bridging those two things. No, I was recently in a conversation where they say like, oh, the digital revolution is over. And I said like, is it really over, or we are just at the very, very beginning? Because it seems that it has been for quite some time with us, but I think we are still at the very early stages of a huge transformation that is coming up, where of course AI is going to play a huge role. So I think I'm very happy and glad that you share all of this with us, because it truly opens up a window of seeing that kind of like futures, and very much appreciate as well the effort on helping us to articulate what are what those those kind of like branching out strategies and how basically all that future could start unfolding. So that was really, really great. So yeah, again, that's all from me. I'll let Alice and Erica to moderate. I'm sure our online audience has a lot of questions for you. So Alice, over to you.
Once again, thank you, Patricia, for this super inspiring lecture. We have a few messages in the chat. I invite everyone who has a question or some comment to the talk to write a message here. Well, first of all, Jill, thanks you for your being optimistic in this sense. And Abdul has a question. He says that you spoke about how we should focus on the output and optimizing the process. And as a practicing architect, how can I start thinking and working in that direction? How do I direct my efforts in upskilling myself in light of these new technologies?
Okay, so working on that direction, optimizing processes. Okay, so I think that the first thing is like, what are you architecting? Like, what is the output that you're going towards, and therefore how are you breaking down what are the different it's like the different segments that need to be taken care of. So I'm going to give like 2 examples. Like, I think the Hard Rock Oculus and the Google headquarters, which are very different projects, but kind of be, can kind of be broken down into similar things. For Google, we had a physical building that needs to get built, and then we just have to make sure that it is coherent in terms of how it works structurally, how it works in terms of acoustics, and how it works in terms of energy, right? But everything is going to affect the design. We're not thinking internally like specific behaviors. We're just thinking about how the design have like certain targets and frameworks of like how this design is going to be successful. So if we know that a successful design has to hit certain targets of daylighting factors, it has to sit certain targets of decibels inside of like the acoustic section, or has to, certain targets like around the energy consumption model that it has on a monthly or yearly basis, then you have to use certain software that allows you to be able to identify where it stands right now as you're designing it. Through different simulations. There's different like software that do this depending on what it is that you're utilizing. And then you're shifting the design to be able to output things that fall within those frameworks, or that can actually beat or succeed those frameworks. Most of the time, it's very hard to beat because the most successful designs are not the prettiest. I mean, this is kind of like the architect's dilemma, which is that, you want to do a building that is very cool, but at the same time, you realize that you have to make sure that it's always facing, perpendicular or to the sun that it's hitting, and that you're not actually placing the building in a way that is like elevated or grounded, or like what kind of energy you're using. So a lot of things just come down to like, what are the best practices for that success, but also how do you want to design it, and therefore how can you tweak your design to be as closest or to as optimized to the success frameworks or metrics that you're placing in the first in the beginning. In terms of like the Hard Rock Oculus, which was, the metrics of success had nothing to do with performance. Like, it wasn't going to kill anyone. It wasn't going to like, ruin the sustainability outputs or like, detriment the planet. It was just about an experience, about creating a beautiful experiences. So here the success metrics and being able to optimize them had more to do with, how do you design an experience that the people relate to the most? How do you create something that's like more easily integrated between one media output and the other? So let's say that if I have digital content, and then I'm doing lighting, and then I'm doing the water, and then I'm doing them all separately and then manually bringing them together, then you can imagine, same as with the Google building, anything that's manually put together, it's very difficult to manage. So we create systems of communication between all this data, that if I have the data for the digital content, then can it grab the colors out of this digital content? Can it be a map that streams like this? Can I use the music and then interpret the music of how the music is moving in time, and use that as different gestures or different output for the way that color insinuates in different parts, or the way that we create shapes in different parts? And the waterfall, you know, I would say that most of it in terms of how we work starts as a manual process to identify what all the parts are. Then we create a system. And then based on the output of the system, we tweak it so that the outcome is not what the machine wants, but what we want, but making sure that it fits within those standards that we have. And then I think you asked, like, how do I direct my efforts in upskilling myself in light of new technologies? I think, I mean, obviously going to great universities is a top notch, because you have access to, you know, great professionals that can speak of it and can teach you all these different softwares. But online, there's a lot of great tools. Think from coding to designing, like anything that has to do specifically around software. I think, you know, when it comes to tools, I think the internet is a great place to learn, and there's a lot of great tutorials for it, and finding communities that are building similar things and that are answering similar questions to the queries that you have. That was a very long answer, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Patricia. Then we have Darkan, who has a very big question I will leave for the end, but Bokekan is asking a more specific one. He says that there are some problems with the integration of technology in companies, and he's often said that there's not enough time for this, as well as for artificial intelligence and with computational design. Have you encountered such problems? And if so, can you share your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason for this, and I'll give you just like a very simple example. A lot of companies, God, I can't name companies because then it becomes a problem. But let's say that a lot of companies that let's say that we use Zoom, and then some others decide to use Teams, right? And it's something as simple as it's just the way that you're communicating through like a video conference, right? It doesn't really matter. But for a company that has 1,000, 10,000, 200,000 employees, I mean, Deloitte has 200,000, 300,000 employees, where they have to have all of their systems and software synced. It has to do with privacy. It has to do with how they communicate. It has to do with how they manage payments, right? They can't have like everyone doing whatever they want. They have to have everything in a very cohesive manner, right? So for us to say like Deloitte, why don't you change from Teams to now Google Meets, which is now incorporating AI in a more efficient way because it's whatever, they're going to be like, changing this for 200,000 people is going to cost us, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, like literally hundreds of millions. Like any small change can be very detrimental, right? So the way that companies do this, if you're a small company, and that's the cool thing, or like the advantage that small companies have, is that they can adapt quicker to new technologies. You can change very quickly. You can just continuously use whatever is the most efficient. Bigger companies, whether it's changing your video communication or your data platform, like whether you're using AWS or going from like one brand to another, those shifts take a lot of effort, take a lot of decision making as well for that effort. It takes a lot of planning to decide, is this shift actually going to make an increment? Like, am I spending 10 million or 100 million on this shift in the next 6 months gonna bring me back that money, multiply it or exponentialize it in the next 5 to 10 years? If not, is it worth it or not? Should we just wait for a new technology? So all these things are the kind of communications that people that are managing these companies have to take. And eventually what they do is that they start small. They grab a small team and they implement it and see how it works. They're like, oh, now instead of explaining your project through renders, this team is going to start explaining it through VR. My parents are like, are you ready for lunch? Because I'm staying with my parents while I'm visiting them. I'm like, not yet. And then so that's the kind of process here, is that's the kind of like decision making that has to be done in an office, and it ends up being a combination of what is the output. Of course, the experience of the employee is very important, but mostly it's like what is the output? What is the the financial like relevance, or like the financial transition, and whether this is something that's a short term or versus a long term goal.
Fantastic, Patricia. Time is running out. I have here one more question, and maybe I will merge it with the more general one we had from before. This one says, as AI continues to grow in complexity and scale, what ethical and regulatory considerations should be addressed in designing with AI to ensure responsible and safe development? Can you share your experience in relation to the work you have been doing? And then the broader question was how latest technologies can bring architects and architecture into the future.
Okay. Wait, the second one is like how emerging technologies can bring architects and architecture to the future. Okay, so I'll start with that one and then I'll go into ethics. So how to bring architecture into the future. I think during this presentation, I highlighted three things. Of course, there's a lot more to it. The first one was metaverse, which means we're going from physical experience to having virtual experiences or being able to combine both of them. The second one was blockchain, which is that the data that you're using for your experiences, whether that be how where the building is placed on the metaverse, like is it in a centralized game or on a decentralized platform, to the exchange that is happening inside, whether it's a ticket sale or it's merchandise or it's an art sale, how is this being moved around, like how are assets and currency being moved, and then the last one being AI, which is that through these design processes or how are we able to use these different language models to make better decisions and to make more personalized decisions or more personalized outcomes for this? So the way to think about it, about like emerging technologies and architecture, is that you already have something that you're doing, whether that be a product, like whether you're designing a car or whether you're designing a building or a city, right? And you're thinking about like, what is the end purpose of it? The car is for mobility, is for transportation, is for moving people around, right? And so you kind of understand that. For a building, it has to do with the programming and the experience. So whether that program is a school or a museum or a theater, whatever it is, it's like what's happening inside. And then the city, it's much more complex, and that's kind of like what I broke up at the end, which has to do with the design of spaces, but it's also about the infrastructure. It's also mobility. It's also governance. It's also transactions. It's also supply chain, economy. Like it has a lot of different layers. But for each of those, they're already being made initially through a manual process, maybe like the Corbusier era, like we can think of everything being very manual, to now being a more computational process in which that all of these things are being done through our computers. And the way that we design things are, taking into account that the information that we have can be shared, and that in some way, I think even parametric design, computational design, which I studied, 10 years ago now, like has been something that has been used through these processes. And now AI is just taking it to the other extreme, which is that when I'm going to design a city, and let's say that I'm making a decision of like where things need to be in the city, like it's not going to be just like research and us, going back to like the best urban designs, which include like Barcelona, which is like right next to you in Paris, and we're not going to just be drawing out like these concepts of designs. We're going to be using a lot of data to be able to form these, which is the data of like what's the population, where's the population interest, how's the economy, what are the different things that we're going to highlight in this economy, if it's going to be culture, if it's going to be commerce, or what's going to be the percentage of these, and that's going to start defining zones, the planning or the zoning of areas that's going to be based on this data, and then the location of it can also be based on that. So AI can very quickly give me, instead of me and the governance team that is putting this together, drawing out a map of maybe one possible solution with a lot of information that we all have through our research, our personal research, we're using a data model that has infinite, or the information of the world placed into one whole thing, and that can give me infinite options. And then with these infinite options, then we can start being more modular as to like, okay, but these are the restrictions, or these are the things that we believe are more important to us as individuals, which is something that we can't expect these language models to be completely humanized and to have personalities and to like understand our culture as deeply, but they do understand processes, and they do understand the optimization of processes, right? So it can maybe even give me like different GDP values out of each design, right? So I think that there's something like really cool about first thinking about like what it is that you're building, what is the output, like what is the reason that you're building it, and then how do we do it today, and how can the technologies that exist now be able to make those processes quicker, better, and cooler, etc. And then in terms of ethics and AI, this is a very serious topic that everyone can't sleep at night over. Ethics is one thing, and then also AI taking over, like a new consciousness beyond humanity that can evolve and potentially turn us into slaves. So there's like a lot of like very extremist situations with this, which I do think that all those situations are possible. But that's why all these regulations are coming into place. Regulations from a governmental standpoint, regulations from a company standpoint, whether it's Google or OpenAI or AWS, like regulations, and then regulations from the individual standpoint of like how we interact with that data, et cetera. In terms of like, I think ethics is it encompasses a lot of things, but one of the bigger I mean, there's a lot of bigger issues. Like there's a lot of big issues. Let's say data security is a very big issue. Data and virtual identity, digital identity is a very big issue as well. Another one is just like information bubbles, biases, and just the fact that the databases that are built right now are based on information from certain demographics, right? And people are realizing that the way that it responds to the information that it responds is coming out from these models, which are very biased already, which is kind of the same thing as we were seeing in social media and information bubbles, that if you like cats, then you're just going to see more cats, right? And it becomes a problem because then you don't realize that there's more animals in the world. I'm obviously exaggerating because that's not the problem, but to the extent of like from political to cultural views to diversity views, for us to have like a more inclusive world that is taking everyone's opinion into account, it's very important for these models to start including information that comes from all over the world and from all types of mindsets. And then the regulations have to match it. Yeah. I would like to hear your thoughts on how we can improve our cities and societies with the.
I don't know if we have time for this one, Patricia. You tell us.
Well, I'll try to do it really quick. So I think it doesn't matter if it's Latin America or it's any country in the world. I think the problems that we're going now from what is called digital transformation, virtual transformation, or just like emerging technology transformation is that it takes time. Like if a company takes time to evolve, imagine a country or imagine the world, right? It's a huge process, right? And it costs a lot of money, especially when it comes, if it's thought in the most traditional way possible. If we start thinking smartly, we realize that maybe it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, because all we have to do is educate people and empower them with that education to be able to make the right decisions, right? So I think that we're too used to that the structure of even countries is so hierarchical that we're waiting for the government and the president and for whatever national organizations to decide how we do education, how do we do health, how do we manage our food systems. Like all of that is kind of dependent on this very traditional system. So like unless they unless the country changes, then we can't change. But I think what we're seeing is that technology is very empowering, and technology does allow for everyone to create from the bottom up as well. Like we don't have to wait for it to be top bottom, it can be bottom up. And if like whether it's me speaking about this or creating programs or different organizations coming together to do something larger, and eventually the government can play a role into it. There's different levels in which we can educate people on new technologies. We can help with the integration, and some of these integrations can be quicker than others, but the more knowledgeable people are, the easier it is to actually have these integrations. And when it comes to funding, it comes back to because a lot of the problems come down to like, how can we integrate new technologies if there's no funding for it? But the funding comes down to like building sustainable business models and making sure that whatever it is that is being proposed is thinking long term. That if we think about how empowering health and AI is going to change the entire health industry for the next 40 years, then it's something that's worth the investment right now. It could even garnish international investment, just like a technology company. It doesn't have to come from a government, right? So there's different ways of thinking about this. And I think most importantly is to think that everything is open. We have access to everything. We honestly, as individuals, have the power and the possibility to do anything now. Like there's no dependencies. So however it is that you would like to help out, I mean, you can probably research as to like what is missing, and then make sure that whatever it is that you're proposing to the right partners or the right organizations is something that is feasible. It is most likely going to happen. Also, anyone that wants to reach out through LinkedIn or through Instagram, you can find me as Patricia Velasquez. I'm happy to answer more questions, or like I'm an advisor to a lot of companies as well as in startups. So I'm happy to share knowledge and to help in any way that I can.
Super. Patricia, thank you so much. Just to ensure that we are not joined by bots and avatars. I want to ask everybody to turn on their camera just to see that there are humans on the other side, because we see beautiful screens and names but no people. So just to say goodbye, don't worry. Even if you are in your pajamas, that's absolutely fine. But we just want to see that there are humans on the other side of the metaverse.
I wasn't seeing anyone before, so now I get to see everyone. That's
exactly. Super. Look at that. Fantastic. We see people that is in, starting the day, some others in, dark nights. So it's just beautiful to see that people from all over the world are connecting. So fantastic to see all of you. Pico, thank you so much again. It was a pleasure. Just maybe a last note from me is that Pico would be one of the juries of the competition as well as an expert. So encouraging everybody to join, to participate, to share ideas, because I think it will be a fantastic and exciting conversation. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and see you in the next one.